All right, everyone, good evening. I'm so happy that you're with us tonight. We are going to get ready to get started. I'm so glad that you're watching from wherever you are, streaming us from whatever digital channel is your favorite these days. We're really glad to be connected with you to do a little bit of learning, to broaden and strengthen our community and engage in some conversation about where we are in the Jewish calendar and where we are in the midst of a conversation that's really a civic, citywide conversation about our city, how it conducts itself, and how it looks after those who live at its margins. So this evening, we find ourselves in the week-long holiday of Sukkot. Of course, this is a time that is all about exploring and expressing the temporariness, the fragility, the transitory nature of our lives and of the world. Of course, one of the most visible, tangible, enduring symbols of this week is that this is the time that we actually get out of our nice, warm, comfortable homes and spend time in the sukkah, in the temporary, fragile, wind-blown, porous structure that we build outside of our homes to really get out into nature, to expose ourselves to the elements, to the wind and the rain, the sunshine and the stars. And we do so, the Jewish texts tell us, as an expression and as a reminder of the fact that our lives are also at all times transitory, fragile, and very vulnerable. We're told that we spend time in the sukkah as a reminder of the vulnerability we experienced on our way out of slavery toward liberation and freedom. But we also do it, I think, as an expression of empathy and sensitivity. One of the texts that it's traditional to read during this time of the festival calendar is the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, which, if you know Ecclesiastes, is all about emphasizing the hollowness and futility of clinging to physical possessions and the physical luxuries of life. It reminds us again and again that doing so is vain and futile, and instead we should spend time concentrating on the things that are important and enduring. What's important, I think, about the spiritual message of Sukkot, though, is that its aim is not to get us to conclude that physical needs are to be transcended, that they're irrelevant, that our job is only to concentrate on the life of the spirit or the mind and not the needs of the body. Instead, I think it's quite the opposite, that the purpose of Sukkot is to engender inside us a heightened capacity for empathy, sensitivity, our ability to empathize and sympathize with those outside of ourselves. It's not an accident, I think, that the sukkah in which we spend time during this festival is meant to be very porous to the elements, both on the sides and in the top, to make sure that we are not shielded from, but exquisitely exposed to the elements of nature, to remember how vulnerable and how sensitive all of us are, and to remind us to keep our eyes open to see all around us, that to remember that the walls of our houses and our buildings and our institutions are not there to shield us from the sight of other people in our city, and in fact is supposed to remind us to prick up our ears and open our eyes to the needs of people that are all around us. When we do the work of spending time in our sukkah, in a sense, reliving the experience of homelessness, wandering, and uprootedness of our people's past, it's not just an act of play acting, playing dress up. Instead, the point of this exercise is to help us feel in our bodies what it's like to be exposed to the elements, what it's like to be in a setting that can be blown over by a strong wind or penetrated by the rain. And on the other end of the holiday, once we've spent this week spending time outdoors, rain or shine, warm or cold, the end of the spiritual process is, I hope, that we are left with a heightened sense of understanding that there are folks for whom spending time all day outdoors, day and night, is not a choice and is not an expression of spiritual exploration, but instead their lived reality every day. And so this year it was important to us to really tie in a social justice element to our observance of the holiday, to spend time sinking ourselves into this time, which is a global invitation to explore, experience, and discuss the reality of homelessness in our city and in our world. So this evening, we're going to have a chance to really explore the our city's struggle with the homelessness situation in our city, to celebrate some of the successes and to have some conversation about where we go next. Because we hope that this conversation tonight will be a conversation and not just a lecture or a seminar, I want to invite you, whether you're watching on Facebook or on our live stream tab on our website, to take a moment to chime in on the chat box, to share your questions or your comments. Those questions and comments will then be fed back to me and to our keynote presenter tonight, so that we can respond to them and engage in conversation with you as best we can over this live stream, so that your questions can be answered in more or less real time while we're together this evening. So really, don't be shy. Please do take a moment to collect your thoughts and your questions and share them with us on the chat wherever you're watching this evening. So I now have the chance to introduce you to our speaker this evening, our friend and our community leader, Thao Costis, who is the president and CEO of Search Homeless Services. I want to tell you a word about Search, and then I'm going to let Thao take the floor and tell us a little bit about her work and where the organization is going. So Search, as you may know, this is an organization we've had a long, fruitful relationship with for many years, in supporting their work to provide hope, create opportunity, and transforming the lives of men, women, and children who are trying to break free from the cycle of poverty and homelessness. Closer to home, you may know Search because of our partnership with them, because of our support of them over the years, and because some of the seeds that grew into this amazing, important, vital organization today were planted by the spiritual environment at our congregation many years ago. So we're very proud of the work that Search does, very proud of the organization that it has become. It is a real delight and a real pleasure for you to get to know my friend Thao, and to hear a little bit about her wonderful work in the community. So Thao, welcome. We're really glad you're here. I want to turn the floor over to you and invite you to share your thoughts and share your presentation. Let's see if Thao is with us and she's able to contribute tonight. I think we may have a little technical hiccup. Let's see if she's with us. There you are.
Sorry.
Welcome back. We missed you. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I hope that this doesn't continue through the night.
Nothing like live TV, right?
That's right.
All right. Well, it's all yours. Thank you for giving us the time. We're really grateful you're here. You and Search mean so much to our synagogue, and I'm really glad that you're here to share a little bit of your wisdom and experience with our community.
Yes. Well, I'm just thrilled to be joining you, and Congregation Emanu is just so important to us, obviously, from the very get-go, and continues to be enduring in our existence and longevity. So thank you. Yes, so homelessness is a critical issue on a daily basis. And right now, of course, we are hearing more and more troubling news and concerns about our economy, about the coronavirus, and how it's affecting so many different lives. So, you know, the crisis that we normally may face in a disaster after a hurricane doesn't compare to the pervasiveness of the impact of it today. And community health, I've always felt like homelessness is a challenge to our community health. And I think people can hopefully understand and register that as long as people are out there, they are factors of infection themselves, and of course their exposure to others is such a problem. So what I'd like to do today is talk to you a little bit about what our community has been able to do on a macro scale over the last few years. How do we compare to other communities, and then more specifically how it's worked and what Search is doing. So I'm going to have a brief presentation or PowerPoint here so that you can see some of the data and facts. We'll go on to the first slide here. So we're going to start with, where are we today? So on a given day, there are almost 4,000 people who are in a shelter or out on the streets of Houston, Harris County, Fort Bend County, and Montgomery. And of course, Harris County and Houston, we have the bulk of the people. Fort Bend and Montgomery is a very, very smaller number. And what is this number? Well, what does it represent? It is a snapshot in time. And the Coalition for the Homeless, works with and our agencies, our partner agencies, as well as volunteers, to go out into our community at the end of January every year. And we've been doing this for 10 plus years, to understand how many people are facing this problem. Through the course of a year, the coalition also keeps a database called the Homeless Management Information System, the HMIS, that tracks how many people are coming to the agencies seeking help. And so 56,000 people through the course of 2019 accessed help in some form or fashion through the assistance ministries of the various communities and neighborhoods to the shelters. So within that 56,000, about half of them, well, less than half, 23,000 of them actually tried to get help because they were homeless. So we'll go on to the next slide. So yeah, so that's the difference. Is the point in time, we have fewer than 4,000. Over the course of time, it affects many people. It's people that are able to help figure out how to get out of that situation, but many people do stay homeless for a while. So what this chart does is it's showing us, since 2011 to 2010, the amazing progress that Houston has been able to achieve. So we went from having that one-day snapshot picture of over 8,500 people who were living in shelters or on the street at any given time, to in 2019, that number going down by more than 50%. San Antonio, they've been able to take it down a little bit, but not significantly. Austin is hovering also rather flat line, the same with Dallas and Fort Worth. We'll go on to the next. And then we look at a snapshot of Houston relative to other communities throughout the country. So this is looking at how many homeless individuals per 1,000 residents. So Houston has the smallest at 0.66 number of individuals per 1,000 residents versus San Francisco. Those of you who've gone to San Francisco these last few years, it's gotten to be such a tremendous problem where people who are homeless are out everywhere. New York City, Seattle, and LA. Those are the top ones. And then you can see how the others compare as well. Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, their numbers are significantly higher. The pattern you may see here is that high cost housing is really contributed to many more people who are homeless per 1,000. So we'll go on to the next slide. So the difference in how we were able to take homelessness from over 8,500 to just fewer 4,000 is because we went from managing the crisis to actually focus on ending the homeless experience. So when Shelley Cypress and our volunteers through Emanu started working on this issue back in 1988-89, we started with a day shelter. We provided food and a place where people could come to, and it was absolutely needed. And over the next 10 years, Search added multiple programs as we saw people's needs for jobs, for childcare, for housing. And so we were responding to the needs at the time, but we weren't able to really get significant traction in actually ending the homeless experience for the vast number of people that we were helping. We had to go from just managing the day-to-day needs and reacting to that to actually getting people into homes. So the next slide will show you that our community came together. So Houston is so philanthropic. We have not-for-profit agencies, thousands of them, and we are very responsive to the needs of our citizens. And so what was happening, though, was that we were all competing for resources, for contributions by our community. And we all had our ideas about how to best help people. But what we weren't able to do was really come together and leverage each other's best capabilities, our best skill sets, and maximize and really leverage the dollars that were coming through until 2011, when we decided, you know what, we're not able to end the homeless experience. Our numbers of homeless people are still so high at over 8,500 that we needed to come together and do things differently. Next slide. So one of the first things that we did was multiple agencies, from shelters to assistance ministries to agencies like ours, we agreed on how we were going to achieve ending homelessness. We studied other communities, New York, Chicago, and other communities where they have tested these various interventions, and found that for people to really be able to focus on what's going to happen beyond tomorrow, they needed to be able to stay in a safe, stable place. Because while you're still surviving and trying to figure out where you're going to sleep tonight and where your next meal is going to come from, that's all that your mind has the ability to try to solve. You aren't able to figure out, how am I going to pay the rent? How am I going to come up with enough money that's going to get me into an apartment in the first place? So we agreed that housing first is the answer. Bringing people specifically from the street into their own apartments, get them a lease in their name, and from there, then really start providing the major medical services, mental health care, help them with their income, and teach them how to be a good tenant. The focus is on them becoming stable and being able to manage their apartment and their life in the future moving forward. Next slide. So what we created was what we called the way home. So we start with the beginning of connecting with people on the street, reaching out to them, engaging them, and prioritizing the most vulnerable. Unfortunately, there's not enough resources for everybody to get housed at the same time. So we had to address the people who are the most sick, the most entrenched, and stuck out on the street. And so we developed a tool to gauge their vulnerability with questions that survey how long they've been out there, what is their medical condition, their mental condition. So Search, Houston Police Department, our sheriff, Star of Hope, Covenant House, we're engaging people on the street. And then we work to move them into homes. So that's the second phase, is stabilizing them, assessing their needs, and helping them to successfully move from the street into a home. And what this requires is actually housing, rent payments. And this comes through the support of our housing authorities, Houston and Harris County Housing Authority, that has vouchers. We often would hear about Section 8 voucher back in the day. Today, we call them tenant-based vouchers or project-based vouchers, but they're vouchers that pay for the rent of these individuals. So our housing authority became a critical partner in this in 2011, where they agreed to provide priority rent for our homeless population. And with that, we were able to move people directly from the street, get their rent paid for, and move them into an apartment. So that's the third element, is having a place that people can go to. You might have heard of New Hope Housing. They are a not-for-profit organization that builds beautiful single-room occupancy apartment complexes. Single-room occupancy is basically a unit that is like a dorm room. It's furnished with a single twin bed, a small kind of kitchenette, microwave, a refrigerator, your own private bath, but really no cooking element. So the complex has a common kitchen area where people go down there and they can be in community cooking together and socializing together. But they each have their own apartment. They have a lease in their name. For some individuals, we actually go out and talk to landlords and find apartments that are willing to take our clients and take the rent voucher that is going to guarantee their rent payment. So that's when Search's team of case managers from our housing department will then go and work with these individuals, and their stay in these apartments, because they have a lease in their name, will be a year and longer. And our work with them is often at least a year, if not longer. Go ahead. So here's the big impact. Since 2012, we've housed more than 18,000 men and women who were homeless, chronically homeless, and moved them into their own homes. We started with our veterans. Almost 7,000 veterans have been able to find themselves homes since we started this in 2011. Once we were able to address veterans homelessness, which basically by middle of 2015, so 4 years into this effort, we were able to essentially say that we have effectively managed veteran homelessness. So if our outreach team were to go out into the street and find veterans today, and they are interested in and willing to move into an apartment, we're able to get them into a home almost immediately or within 30 days. Chronically homeless individuals were our next group of people. These are people who've been on the street for longer than a year. They also have a disabling condition. So again, the super vulnerable. And then next, we started working with families and other homeless individuals who didn't necessarily fit the criteria of being chronically homeless. Perhaps they've been homeless for less than a year, maybe still have a disabling condition, maybe not, but their vulnerability is still somewhat high, and we need them to be in their own homes. So their intervention has rent subsidies, but it's a little shorter time frame, or it is shorter time frame. It's 1 to 2 years. So overall, though, our community since 2012 has put more than 18,000 people into homes. So that's why Houston, as big of a city as we are, we really don't see as many homeless people as some of these other major cities have been struggling with. Next. So this is Search's outreach team. Since COVID, of course, mid-March, one of the first things we did was to get PPEs, the personal protection equipment. And within 2-3 weeks, when we finally were able to get it, our outreach team was the first to get out. We had to go out and inform people who are on the street about what's happening in our community. Why did everything shut down? Provide them with the face masks and hand sanitizing lotions, because they weren't able to go get their hands, washed like they normally might have. Restaurants had closed. You couldn't go into a McDonald's and use their restroom if they were out in the outskirts. Many of our feeding centers also had to close down. And so providing them with accurate information was really important. Teaching them about what they could do to practice social distancing, that, sleeping while they're outside, they're a little bit less risk, but they tend to cluster together for safety reasons. And so what could we do to make sure that they didn't put themselves at greater risk? And the other thing that our community did was to create a place where people could go to quarantine if they develop symptoms, having a process by which they could get tested quickly and easily. And that is through one of our partners, Healthcare for the Homeless Houston, and having a place to stay while they rest and wait for their results and or quarantine away from others. The other thing that we did was to bring food out to these people. We brought out packs of food that would last them 1 week or longer, because again, they couldn't go to their traditional places for food. And I think we have one more slide. So even though COVID has hit and we are having to operate in somewhat of a hybrid model where most of the time our staff are working remotely, but they are back in action out on the field or in our building or at the apartment complexes. So we continue to help people move into apartments, find apartments that are willing to take them, get new leases started. All these things are happening virtually, which means we're having to bring equipment to them or bring them to where they can look for these apartments virtually and get the training that they need and do the documentation, which has been a little bit difficult. Getting IDs nowadays takes much longer than traditional. But staying focused on housing, because as we all can recognize, housing is healthcare. Being in a safe place to quarantine, to be protected from the environment, from the potential contagion is very important. And I think that's it. So I am open to questions or.
That's great. Awesome. Thank you, Thao. So, it's there's actually a lot of good news to share, right? I mean, I think there's a lot for us to be proud of and confident about and feel really good about our city and feel good about the progress that we've made as a community. I think that's, I would want that to be one of the headlines of this conversation. That slide you showed up at the beginning that sort of demonstrated the slope in our homelessness numbers compared to other big cities, that's really striking.
Yes, and I think Mark Eichenbaum is a member of your congregation. I know that Mark has also shared some of his insight. He's been instrumental in getting the mayor and us working together. And yes, and so people from all over the country have come to Houston to try to learn from our community and how we've done this, because as a major metropolitan city with such vast geographic spread and diversity and all of that, there are a lot of challenges. Right. But yes, like you said, we have a lot to be proud of. We've done some amazing things. We've prioritized, some of the people that this is very atypical, right? I mean, I think most people think about, oh, well, why don't you help the person that's easiest? It's much quicker and easier to help somebody who has less homeless time. And yes, it makes sense, but we keep leaving the people who are the sickest behind if we don't address their needs.
Right. And tell me, so, I think the decision to sort of focus on homelessness among the veteran population is really something that, is an interesting and compelling story, and also that one that has a nice, again, a nice sort of conclusion for us to be proud of. Can you talk a little bit about, I know that the House of Tiny Treasures is something that's also a significant part of the work that you do. I wonder if you can just take a second to reflect a little bit about how looking toward the care of families with young children, how that's maybe presents different kinds of challenges, what's easier about it, what's harder about it, what's more pressing about it. And again, a reminder to our audience that, we're starting to receive some of your questions and comments. Don't hold back. You can keep them coming, and we're filtering them behind the scenes, and we'll start answering those very soon. So Thao, if you want to talk a little bit about that first.
So when the House of Tiny Treasures first started back in 1992, it was mostly a response to the need of individuals or parents who needed to go to work and didn't have a place where they could trust that their child would be taken care of consistently and safely. And we've evolved over the years, because the other thing that we learned about our adults that come through our building or that we find out in the street is that they struggle with socialization. They struggle with lifelong health challenges, mental and physical. And what we've learned is that childhood trauma can result in all of these things. It results in people's inability to socialize with others, to have good relationships, to be able to be healthy physically, just from the way that your brain develops from that early age. And so it is our commitment to stopping that cycle and the resurgence of this type of outcome, which we also are seeing, they are the higher risk factors of people who are being afflicted by COVID and dying from this condition. And so that is the commitment that we have. And yes, and as far as the complexities or the different ways that is difficult. So first of all, families, they often have to separate when they experience homelessness. They want to shield their children from this experience. They don't want to get caught because they're worried that their children are going to be removed from their care by CPS, by police intervention. And so they have to find somebody, some family member, hopefully, or somebody they can trust to take care of their child while the parent can't stay with that family. They are out in the street, they are living in their car or whatever they can do to survive. And so much of what we are doing is then helping them to reunite and be a family unit again. So that is one of the efforts of stability, and so this is stability for the children as well as the parent. I mean, because the child's welfare is such a great motivator for that parent to kind of figure out what's going on in their lives and how to rechannel their energy and efforts to make it work better. So our House of Tiny Treasures today is an early education program, an early childhood development program, where we are focusing on children 2 to 5 years old, when their brain is still very malleable. And even though they've gone through these traumatic experiences, we can help reshape that, reshape how they learn to be with others, how they see themselves, that they are not the problem child or the all the labels that are negative that might have been said about them to them, and then how they build a sense of confidence and ability to kind of manage their emotions and the world around them. So we're working on behavior intervention, working with the children as well as with the parents to have consistent stability. And that is, again, housing is so important to provide that basic foundation, and then how to kind of keep people motivated and keep people learning new skills to cope with life stressors.
That's great. There was a question in the chat about sort of, the process of going from homeless to housed. I would assume that it's not always sort of a straight line where, you get a place to live and then you're, stable and for the long term. Do you have a sense about like how often the case is that someone who winds up getting housing is able to stay? What are the factors and the pitfalls that lead to someone being unhoused again after they wind up getting stable housing? And like, how sticky does this wind up being? How reliable does the process of going from homeless to housed, what kind of data do you have?
Yes, actually, I was looking at our statistic for last year, and we have 88% retention, meaning that once somebody is in, that 88% of them stay in at least for that year, if not longer. So we have some clients who have been with us for years, multiple years, even into the decades, and so that's for further down the line. but yeah, so I think, just starting from the beginning, I think first thing is many of our public, we wonder, it's like, well, do they choose to be homeless? And if, even if they were offered housing, would they want to, and would they choose to be in an apartment? And the answer is yes, if they are able to have their own place. Living in a shelter is different from living in your own home, because shelters, just by the sheer nature that they are trying to house 100 or more people, they have to build in rules and hours and when you can come and go. And it makes life little too limiting, especially if they're trying to work, they're working at night, life becomes more complicated. So they do choose to be outside. But if they have their own key, they can come and go. The lease is in their name. This is housing first, is it's yours. We can sway, we can ask, and if you break the rules of being a good tenant, you will get kicked out. But the rules that they live in tenancy is the same as if you or I or any of us are getting an apartment. We have to follow those rules, right? But other than that, it's about life and about your choices and how do you make it work. And so yes. So first of all, yes, they do want to. And then when we are able to get that um, rent payment kind of approved for this individual, then we have a team of housing navigators who actually go pick them up because they don't have a car. Well, back in the day before COVID, where we would actually like take them to see, okay, here are your choices. Choice is very important. Human beings want choice. Even if, we're a 3-year-old, 3-year-olds want choice, right? In order for them to be happy. People are happier when they have choice. And so I think sometimes we think, oh, well, they're so desperate, they should just choose whatever's available to them or given to them. And yes, I mean, if that's the only thing, choice, versus safety and all of that, yeah, so some people may be willing to take that. But yes, so the more choice we can offer people, the stickier it is, because they get to say, yes, out of these 2 or 3 options, I get to choose this one that fits me best. And then from there, yeah, teaching them how to negotiate, negotiate life and some of the challenges that are presented to them.
Awesome. Thank you. We had a question about I think partly about funding and partly about sort of institutional support more broadly. The question is about, how much search is, let's say, supported from government grants, from the city, from the state, or whatever, how much you are supported by individual donors, foundational giving, charity support. Can you break that down a little for us?
Sure. So our budget now is just over $12 million annually. And over 50%, about 55% comes from government grants. And these government grants mostly are federal funds, HUD, Housing Urban Development, homeless housing. So that is the entity that funds our portion. And it comes directly from HUD, or it gets channeled through the state, the city, and the county. The city does give us some money. It's about 400,000, so not a huge amount out of the 12 million. The county, not yet. So really it is federal funds that is coming through. And then, so on the balance of our budget is private fundraising. So you might have been invited to our picnic or our luncheon. Of course, you were our wonderful guest there at our luncheon and speaker. We raise 1.2 million or so from the fundraising events. And then foundations make up another million plus, individuals also another million or short of that. But yeah, so United Way also gives us a little bit of money, just under 400,000. But yes, so we count on every little gift from, the small fundraisers that children do to the big foundations that give us more, but every bit.
Yes, thank you. So if anyone watching is looking for a place to direct some tzedakah funds, I know Search would be grateful for your support. If you have a bar bat mitzvah kid is looking for a mitzvah project, those are always great places to direct them. Speaking of fundraising and financial gifts, one of the things that we did this year, which we tend to do each Yom Kippur when we ask people to do some time thinking about, as part of the fast that they do on Yom Kippur, to think about making a gift to relieve hunger as sort of a symbolic companion to the fact that they're going without food during the day of Yom Kippur. This year, a portion of our Ed Wayne Hunger Fund went to support Search's Emergency Foods Fund. Can you say a word about what that is, what it does, where the money goes, who it feeds?
Yes, yes. So, we did go away from providing the daily meals from the first 20 years of doing the day shelter, but we still have a very robust outreach team, engaging people on the street and helping them move into homes is very, very important. And so as we are meeting people out there, sometimes we don't bring out food just as an automatic. It's as they are working with us and as we are working with them to make these appointments, have day-long really adventures, because imagine when you're homeless, standing in line is like the most time-consuming thing that you do all day long, because you're waiting in line for food, you're waiting in line for your IDs and such like that. So having something to eat while you're going through all of this helps sustain their, make them stickier, to not give up on these initiatives. And yes, and so as people are moving in, if they don't have anything, we want to provide them with the essentials. And then from there, we teach them about, okay, where can we find food that's going to keep sustaining you over the next, as you're staying here. So yes, it's the emergency.
Got it. So a couple questions about the sort of just the real nitty gritty, experience about being a Houstonian, experiencing homeless folks in the street when we make our way to work or school or whatever. So one question that I thought was quite interesting was that, we've seen the data, we know the numbers, we know that Houston has a lot to be proud of compared to other big cities in the country. But the question that came from our audience was, when Houstonians talk about homelessness in the city, they tend to think that the problem here is worse than it actually is. We tend to think, I imagine if you polled Houstonians, what are the biggest civic issues facing our city, homelessness would be close to the top of the list, even though the numbers say otherwise. Why do you think people overestimate the size of the homelessness problem in Houston?
Yes, I think as long as we have people who are on the street and people who are on the street corner panhandling, that it is hard to reconcile what to do, and how big the problem is, because as long as there's somebody out there that's in need, we are going to emotionally react. And human beings, we are emotional creatures, and we make assumptions and we go right to, oh, the problem is so bad because here's this problem right in front of me and I don't know what to do about it. And nobody else seems to be doing enough about it. And we often say within our work groups and in our peers, it's like, as long as there's anybody out there, people aren't going to believe our numbers. And so I think we have to really kind of step back and recognize that, yes, there are concentrations of people, especially in the center part of the city, downtown. And now more and more people are living in downtown. And so you will definitely be seeing it. But what you see may also be people who have homes that they go to at the end of the day, but they are out here enjoying the environment, communing with others. And so, so we do have our filters of what we think may be, or who we think may be homeless. So yes, I think this is going to be an ongoing challenge that we just will have to recognize. And that's why it's so important for us to all register. There are some data here. There's data to demonstrate that, yes, there's probably some room for error in some of these data, because it's hard to count homeless people because we're not like talking to everybody,
Right.
And we're probably missing people too. So, but we're following the same methodology and being consistent from year to year to year, and we're seeing this trend go down. And yes, we will always probably see people out on the street, but let's give each other, some grace, and let's figure out how we can help those that we do see.
Beautiful. And so, and there's also, I guess, sort of building off that, there's a pair of questions that are closely related. One asker wants to know who to contact when there is a homeless issue in your homes or businesses. And another asks, is there a way to connect the folks that we see out on the street to services?
So we do not yet have a central number to call. We do, so right now I know with people who are needing help as they're losing their homes or needing to find resources, we do suggest people call 211. So 211 is the United Way's helpline. And so I would suggest that as the beginning, if you are talking to somebody and you're trying to help that person, get to some resource. That's the central for all of us. We will be actually coordinating with our Coalition for the Homeless and our partners who are doing outreach, especially our police and sheriff's departments, to see if they can provide a number that they can have somebody fielding calls by our community members who see people. And yes, and providing some guidance or instruction for us citizens about, okay, when I see somebody who's panhandling, what do I do versus somebody who looks clearly ill or vulnerable? There's difference, right? And so how do we not inundate our police with things, actions that really aren't appropriate? But yes, when we see somebody who's vulnerable, who can we call? So and that may be
211 is the right way to go. If you see, for example, it looks like you said, there's someone that's struggling medically, or someone that, that needs, is this sort of like
financial,
kind of a rapid,
financial aid,
rapid
food
response?
aid.
Okay.
Right. Because what 211 does is that they will then, I try to figure out what's in that area, what's closest to wherever you're calling from, or that person who's in need.
We have a lot of, I know I get these questions a lot. I'm sure you do too. A lot of questions about that experience of driving down the street and stopping at a stoplight. And there's, the guy right there with the sign. So, the question, there are a couple questions. One is like, what do I do? What's the most helpful thing to do? What's the most moral thing to do? Which may be a different answer. We know that we've heard from the mayor and the city that about this meaningful change program to try to discourage Houstonians from, handing out cash to folks that are asking at the intersection. So, I guess I'm asking a couple questions bundled together. One is search in line in step with that initiative from the mayor's office about meaningful change? And then secondly, if that's the case, okay, so we're being discouraged from handing money to folks that are panhandling. What should we do instead? Because we don't want to be callous and we want to be supportive. And, I am part of the leadership of a large spiritual organization that we talk a lot to about nurturing and upholding those moral obligations to other human beings. So what are our marching orders, Thao?
Right. So we are supportive of not providing cash necessarily to the individual. We absolutely believe that treating that person as a human being, acknowledging that person by looking him or her in the eye and saying hello. Um, uh, if you have, I know some of our faith groups and others, and if you come to Search's event, we try to, build these little survival kits, right? So even if you carry bottles of water in the car, Houston is always so hot, and water is always, it's such a valuable commodity that could be provided to that person that you encounter. Or the survival kit that has, a little snack pack that's non-perishable, along with the water. Yes, and if you really, have a great initiative, you want to go to the grocery store, I'm not sure if you can get it there, Metro bus passes. Transportation is so invaluable to people. So I think one of the church groups is doing that for the Lamar High School kids, to be able to have bus passes so that they can go to and from school. Those kind of things. But yeah, so cash itself, I would try to resist it. I know sometimes, it's hard to say no when that person is looking at you and they look like they're emaciated and need something. So I say, follow your heart. But yes, try to give them something that can satiate without cash.
That's helpful. Thank you. At the beginning, I'm trying to remember which slide it was associated with in your presentation, but I remember you saying something about raising the question about, knowing that we have to sort of prioritize and make choices about where we reach out first. Are there, maybe this is an elementary question, are there enough rooms and beds in Houston to house everybody who's homeless?
Well, because we are placing people in apartments, Houston has a lot of apartments. And so the challenge that we have, though, is that we are getting affordable apartments is getting a little further out of reach.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be the big challenge, I think, for us, Houston community, is will we keep building, and we build further and further out geographically, which makes it more difficult because we don't have public transportation that goes that far. And so, and are these homes going to be where people can maintain them if they were working an hourly pay job? So yes, so for our homeless individuals, our challenge is finding landlords or property management who are willing to accept a voucher which says to that person, this person's poor, sure, I can get guaranteed rent payment, but are they going to be a higher risk for my apartment complex? So, so they do screen them if they have poor rental history, if they have evictions in their history, if they have criminal records, even though they have served their time and paid their dues, they still may not get accepted as a tenant. And that's
it's interesting. I mean, you look at the cities that are higher on that bar graph you showed. I mean, there's obviously a correlation. New York, San Francisco, Seattle, these are all big cities, but more importantly, places where housing is extremely expensive. You have to wonder, as Houston's numbers go up, if we're going to be at risk at sliding back down that scale.
Right. And that's the thing that we really need to pay attention to and work on. Okay, how do we advocate for our apartments, or for those options to be still available? And this is not just about our homeless people getting into homes, but it's also those that are in homes now, making sure that they're able to stay, because that's what we don't want, is for them to not be able to afford anymore and fall into homelessness. And
right.
Yeah.
All right, so I got one last one that we can end with, and that is like, what's the end game? What does it look like? How does Search know that it's fulfilled its mission and succeeded? Is it conceivable? Is it ridiculous fantasy to imagine that there's going to be a day where you'll have put every homeless person in a home? Is that what you're aiming for? Tell us, like, what's your dream come true about the success of Search?
Yeah. So we have our vision statement is that we have a Houston without homelessness. It would be ideal where if people do find themselves unable to afford their home and they must, get out of it, that they are able to quickly access help, access the right resources, and have an avenue to get back into a home within 30 days or less. And that would, we know that life is going to cause challenges, and so we talk about this phrase is making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. So brief, how do we make it as brief as possible, and once they're back in their home, that it doesn't happen again? And then let's make it as rare as possible so that people don't ever have to face this in the first place. That would be the really ideal. Yeah.
Great. I let's say rare, brief, and non-recurring.
Yes.
That's great. I love that. Very good.
Yeah.
Well, this was terrific. I'm really glad we had time for this conversation. Very grateful that you gave us the time out of your evening to talk about this, and of course, deeply grateful for the work that you're doing at Search and for our city. It's an organization that does such vital, life-saving, morally imperative work. So I'm really, really happy that it has you at the helm. Really grateful for our friendship and our partnership, and really thankful that you took time to be with us.
So are we. Thank you so much for including me and really, talking about homelessness. It's more than just Search. It is about our greater community. So we are so thrilled to have your support.
Great. Well, thank you. And to everyone who's with us this evening, thanks for giving us your time as well. I want to remind you, Thao talked about Mark Eichenbaum, our member and our friend and our partner in this work in the mayor's office. Mark will be featured on tomorrow's edition of Conversations. That is 12 o'clock noon. You can watch that conversation in the same ways that you're watching us tonight, whatever web stream, website, or video streaming service you're using. Please come and join us to hear a little bit from Mark and about the work he does tomorrow at noon. We're really grateful that you took the time out of your evening to learn and ask questions and be with us as part of this really important conversation about our city, about our spiritual obligations, and about what we can and should be doing as faithful people, particularly during this week of Sukkot, when we're more especially attuned to the vulnerabilities of life, more attuned to the fragile transition between being housed and being homeless, and and again ramping up the potential for empathy and kindness and compassion inside all of us. So Chag Sameach, happy Sukkot. Thank all of you for being with us. We'll see you next time. Thanks for your time. Be well, and happy Sukkot.